You are listening to The Thought Leaders Show with the world's cutting-edge, hottest innovators, influencers, and impact makers today. If you are looking for inspiration and motivation, listen in. Welcome to The Thought Leaders Show. Now, here's your host.
Hi, this is Tammy Patzer, and I'm really excited to introduce today's guest, Dave Nassaney. Dave is an author, speaker, radio host, and entrepreneur who has just published his fifth book, It's My Life Too, Reclaim Your Caregiver Sanity by Learning When to Say Yes and When to Say No. However, his most important role is caregiver to his lovely wife, Charlene, who suffered a massive stroke 21 years ago. He has recently shared the speaking stage with fellow entrepreneur, actress, and interactive medicine guru Suzanne Summers at the Harvard Entrepreneurship Annual Business Expert Forum. You can go to caregiverscaregiver.com to learn more about Dave's mission to stop caregiver burnout. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you so much for having me, Tammy.
I'm excited to talk to you because caregiving has to be one of the most emotionally and physically draining things a person can do, especially when you're caregiving for someone you love so much. So tell me more about how you got started in the caregiving business.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right about caregiving. You know, I always like to say there's three kinds of people in the world. Either you're a caregiver, or you're going to become a caregiver, or you're going to need a caregiver one day. And so that basically covers everybody because already a third of the population are caregivers. Curious, have you had any caregiving experience?
You know, I was thinking about that. And when I was little, my mom was sick all the time. So I grew up in a very limited capacity caregiving because I was always giving my mom coffee or bringing her things or helping her with different things. And then as she got older, she had heart problems. And I used to run home from work every day at lunch to make sure that she had lunch and to check on her. And I remember how stressful that was because I had an hour for lunch. And it was about a 20-minute drive. So I had 20 minutes to get there, 20 minutes to take care of her and eat for myself, and then 20 minutes to get back to work. And I did that for a couple years, but you know, I never even thought about it in that way.
See, you're a caregiver. I mean, when I became a caregiver, I didn't even know what a caregiver was.
Right.
I mean, so who am I? I'm an entrepreneur. I own a gas station for 37 years. My family was in the gas station business. Been happily married to my wonderful wife for 42 years. But during the first 21st year of our marriage, she suffered this headache of her life. And we were on the third day, going into the fourth day of the headache. And she figured I better go to the doctor. But before we could get to the doctor, it was too late. By the time the ambulance arrived, the woman I loved had suffered a massive stroke, left her severely speech impaired and paralyzed on her right side. And at that moment, Tammy, our world just turned upside down and nothing would ever be the same again. And in fact, the next 2 years was a living hell for both of us. You know, Charlene became angry and bitter because, you know, she was grieving her loss. And then I became angry and bitter because I was grieving my loss. We had both lost a lot. And, you know, I remember feeling so guilty all the time. And there was a point where I finally said, you know, I can't do this anymore. So I sat down and I wrote her a letter. I said, Charlene, why are you so mean to me? It's so hard being your husband and taking care of you all the time, 24/7, and not getting any love or appreciation back in return. I said, yeah, I just don't think I can be with you anymore. I mean, I'll take care of you financially, but I just can't be with you. You know, don't get me wrong. I wanted to love my wife. I wanted to care for her. I wanted us to have that loving relationship that we had, you know, for the first 21 years of our life together and happily married and all that. But it was just so hard being on the receiving end of all that anger. And it's so hard even to think about it and talk about it now. But to make a long story short, she had to go through the grief and the anger and the depression. It took about a couple of years. It seemed like forever. But she finally got through it, and the anger disappeared, and the depression disappeared, and she finally accepted her disability, and she became her old self again, and our love was rekindled. And no, I didn't leave her or divorce her or anything like that. I just took one day at a time, went to caregiver support groups, and realized that if I didn't take care of me first, there's no way I could take care of my wife. It's like the airlines tell us, in the event of emergency, put your oxygen mask on first before you help your loved one with their mask. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble. You go down, everybody goes down.
Well,
so that's my story.
I remember, when you asked me about that, and I remember just sometimes being so exhausted from being, worried about, my mom, is she eating enough? All the different things. Is the medication right? And I know that you've created a radio show and a program where you deal with a lot of these things like caregiver burnout and things like that. So can you tell me more about your radio show and how people are responding to that?
Sure. Thanks to Charlene and my caregiver support group, good always comes out of tough times. And, I finally realized, that there are so many other caregivers out there going through the same pain that I was going through, feeling lost and alone like I did, and wanting to give up, like I almost did. And I says, I want to help them triumph over that pain. I don't want them to give up like I almost did. So I became Dave the Caregiver's Caregiver. I now host a weekly radio show to caregivers. I write blogs and articles. I do a podcast. I interview people who have not only survived but thrive caregiving. I produce uplifting videos, weekly conference calls. I offer resources, and I even have a coaching program, and I absolutely love it. And, I'm just so excited that I'm able to help people. We have a membership website now that people can come on and just join our community and let us love on them and get the support that they need. If I didn't get that support back then, I just don't know where I would be today, or even if I'd still be married to my wife. Who knows? I might have slit my wrist, because at times you just feel like you don't want to go another day. But I'm here to let people know that you're in this, and this too will end, to quote a verse from the Bible, that it is temporary and it's not going to last forever, and things are going to get better, but you absolutely need that support, and you got to take care of your needs first. So through my radio show, through my books, I just wrote a book, as you said, and it's so hard for caregivers to get over that mentality that everyone else is more important than me. Everyone else's needs come first, and if there's any crumbs left over, I'll get it, yet they deprive themselves of sleep, of nourishment, of rest, of relaxation. Ask yourself, when's the last time you went to a movie with a friend? When's the last time you had a good night's rest? A lot of people, they don't want to ask for help. They think nobody can do it as good as they can. Well, you're right. Nobody can do it as good as you, but you don't have to have perfection. Adequate care is good enough so that you can go get a coffee at Starbucks for an hour, or go get a massage for 2 hours, or go to a movie with a friend, or even be so bold as to take a weekend off, arrange for someone to come in, and there's just so much you can do, but you got to get out of that complaining negative mentality, because when you're in that place, everything's impossible. Everything is hopeless, and you just don't want to do anything. It's just a bad place to be.
And I imagine that all leads to what they call caregiver burnout, and some of the things that you were describing, like just going, like you said, going to get a cup of coffee, going somewhere like for a couple hours, that can relieve all that pressure of constantly being on. You talked about the when your wife had the stroke and you obviously you lost the wife who had been there for 21 years.
Yeah.
If you had children, I imagine they lost their mother, and she lost her. And talk a little bit about the grief process, because sometimes we don't always equate all these feelings as being a process. So like you said, this too shall pass. What could someone expect on both sides of that spectrum as learning how to get through grief?
Yeah, I was so dumb and naive. I mean, I didn't know nothing. All I knew was, how to be a real estate investor, how to be an entrepreneur, how to run a gas station. But I knew nothing about caring for another human being. I mean, obviously, I was a husband and a father, so I knew that. But caregiving is just a whole different animal. And so I didn't even know what grief was, or that there was a process, that it's normal to feel, like angry and be in denial about things and be depressed and try to find a way out of this, because I'm a fix-it guy. I used to be an auto mechanic. So when something's broken, I want to fix it, but you just can't fix some things quickly like you can replace a carburetor or something on a car. So the grief process, Mary Kubler-Ross came up with a 5-phase process of grief. And the first phase is called denial. Think about it. Something happens, your boyfriend, your girlfriend just broke up with you, or the doctor just told you, you got 3 weeks to live, or your wife just hands you divorce papers, or your attorney says, I'm sorry, bankruptcy is the only way out of this, or any loss that you can imagine. What's the first thing we do? No, I can't be going through this. No, you're wrong. No, I'm going to see another doctor. No, please, what can I, anything. And that's called denial. Our brain just can't process the reality. So it denies it. And that's a normal thing. And it's normal to be in denial, maybe 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, maybe a week. But some people, and maybe people like this, seem to be living their whole life in denial.
Yes.
And that's not a healthy thing. So after we finally get through the denial, enough people slap us in the face and say, snap out of it, smell the coffee. Then when reality sets in, the next stage is usually anger. You get angry because you want to blame somebody. Well, it's your fault. This wouldn't have happened if you went to the doctor, or, this wouldn't have happened if whatever. And so anger is that was my wife's favorite stage. She was in anger a lot. And, there was an old Nat King Cole song that says, you only hurt the ones you love, the ones you shouldn't hurt at all. And
I hear that.
Since I was the only one around, basically, I mean, she had other people around, but I was the one around 24/7. So I got the brunt of this anger. Everything was my fault. And especially, when we had to move out of our 2-story house because she couldn't climb stairs anymore. Well, that was my fault. I sold her dream house, the house that she was going to die in and bury her in the backyard and never move again. And then she couldn't drive anymore, so I had to sell her car. And, of course, that was my fault. And just one thing after the other, it was all my fault. And I just couldn't take it anymore. I took many trips to, New York and Florida and Nashville to relatives who I haven't seen in years or decades, just to get away, just to be around people who loved me and could minister to me, because I needed a break. And I would often come back refreshed and a new person, and able to take the abuse a little longer until next time. So after we get through the anger, and that could take a while. I mean, it took 2 years for my wife to get through her anger. So you caregivers out there, be patient and take those breaks, because that's how I survived. After anger comes something called bargaining. And sometimes the bargaining comes before the anger. It's where, you try to find a way out of this thing. If it's a girlfriend who just dumped you, you try to bargain or negotiate, say, like, well, can we just be friends? Just try to get something back so that you're not totally broke up. It's hard to do when the doctor says you have cancer and you have 3 weeks to live. That's a little harder. Or if your loved one dies, there's no negotiating death. There's no
Right.
negotiating cancer, usually. Many times people can fight and beat cancer, of course. After we get through the bargaining phase and realize that doesn't work very well, the next logical phase, of course, is depression. And this is the most dangerous phase because, this is where people start thinking about taking their lives. And I highly recommend if there's a difference between sadness and clinical depression. A lot of times our brains just become chemically imbalanced when a severe loss happens like that. We're grieving severely, and you should definitely go see a doctor and perhaps get on an antidepressant. There's nothing bad about antidepressants. They're not drugs. They don't make you like go in la la land to get through the depression. All it's doing is replacing the chemical imbalance in your brain. And a lot of times you won't feel like you're on drugs or marijuana or morphine or anything. You're just going to feel normal. And so a lot of people have this misconception about antidepressants equating them with drugs, quote unquote, So then finally, when you get through all of that stuff, you will start to see the daylight of that thing called acceptance. And acceptance is a wonderful place. It's where we finally start realizing that, this isn't going away. And, if I'm still here, God's probably got some plans left for me, or he would have taken me out. And maybe I can handle this new normal. If you're disabled, you start looking at all the wonderful mobility products that are on the market, power wheelchairs and vans with power lifts. And there are so many people out there, famous people, important people. I'm thinking of that famous scientist who had MS or something, and he could barely talk. He had a thing to make his voice be projected, and he had a wheelchair that he
Stephen Hawking.
Stephen Hawking, yes, he would do it by blowing air into this little tube. I mean, here's a guy who's offered so much to humanity and society, and the guy couldn't talk, he couldn't walk, he could barely get around, and yet he didn't give up. He used the technology that was available around him. So when you decide that new normal is okay, and maybe I can do this, and then you start thinking about all the things that you can accomplish, and pretty soon you just consider yourself a normal person once again. So that's basically the 5 stages of grief. Some go in a different order. Some you go back to stage 1 or stage 2. There's just any combination of things that can happen when you're going through the grief process. But the main goal is to reach that acceptance. And you don't want to rush anybody if they're not ready. I made the mistake of telling this girl who was still grieving the loss of her fiance. He died unexpectedly. 5 years, she's still just consumed with the grief. And, on her Facebook page, she still had a picture of him and her. And I says, it's been 5 years. Maybe you should think about moving on. And boy, she just came at me like a mad dog, tearing my head off, saying, everybody grieves in their own way. And who are you to say, I should be over it? Blah, blah, blah. So I don't tell people that they should be over their grief anymore. I just help them if they want to help it to go faster. I help them to speed it up.
I would think that after 5 years, you would want somebody to help you speed it up, because that's a long time.
Well, I sure would, but a lot of people get solace and comfort in grief, which, I can understand that. Sometimes it feels good to just sit on your pity potty or stay in bed with the covers over your face and not want to get up and not want to shower, not want to eat. Or I know that feels good. It's comforting, but how long is that healthy for?
Right. So do you find that a big part of why some people have such a hard time being caregivers is, well, obviously they have to go through that grieving process, but the guilt feeling of why did it happen? You've seen it or heard it where something happens and people wish it'd be like, I wish it had been me, not them, or they feel guilty about not being able to always feel so loving. Like you said that you had to write your wife a letter saying, hey, why are you so mean to me?
Yeah.
Did you feel that guilt played any part of this? Like you said that your wife's headache was like 3 days long. Did you go through that feeling like, oh, I should have known it was more serious. I should have done this. I should have done that.
Absolutely. Those are called the woulda, shoulda, couldas. And, it's so easy. I felt guilty about so many things. I mean, the paramedics said, where do you want to take her? And I said, I don't know. Where would you take your wife if she was having a stroke? And we had a little tiny rinky-dink hospital that was closer to our house, and then a big medical center which was 10 minutes further. Because I gave the decision to them to make, they chose the rinky-dink place, and unfortunately, that was the wrong decision. Because if you ever have to choose, always go for the larger place, even if it's further away, because your odds are better. And so I blame myself for that, for not knowing more about strokes. Not knowing that she should have went to the big medical center, not taking a more active role in the doctors and what they were doing. They were making decisions without consulting me. I know so much more now, but after a while, you just have to realize there are two kinds of guilt, and I liken it to a disposable diaper, believe it or not. But that's funny enough to make you remember. There's deserved guilt and there's undeserved guilt. Now, deserved guilt is when you do something wrong. I mean, our consciences, if they were developed properly and healthily, are designed to let us know, like a red light, a red flag, danger, Will Robinson, that let's stop everything and look at what we're doing. Something is wrong. And so you examine yourself, did I do this? Do I deserve this guilt in any way? And if the answer is no, then get rid of it. Just like a disposable diaper collects the poop, and then you fold it up and you throw it away. What happens if you leave that diaper on a baby for 1 day, 2 days, a week, a year? I mean, their bottom would be raw, and they would be very uncomfortable. They wouldn't stop crying. And that's what guilt does to us. It destroys us. And I know people who have been living in guilt for, weeks, months, years, forever.
Right.
And I'm sure some people as well. They're just constantly feeling guilty about everything. And I didn't say it, but guilt is kind of part of the grief process as well. It kind of disperses itself with the anger, and then it comes in with the depression. So, like I said, you want to make sure that you are truly undeserving of the guilt. And if you're not sure, then ask a trusted mentor. Hey, my mother said this about me. Do I have any right to feel guilty about this? Is she correct? And if they agree with you, no, you have no reason to feel guilty about this. And let's face it, mothers are excellent at dispensing undeserved guilt, aren't they?
Yeah.
So the next step, obviously, is let's say that the guilt is deserved. You screwed up and you did something wrong. You said something wrong. Fix it any way you can. Apologize, make amends, pay the ticket. Throw yourself at the mercy of the court. Turn yourself into the police. Whatever you did wrong, fix it. And that's called repentance. And after you fix it, after you make good on it, and incidentally, whoever you did the wrong to, they don't have to necessarily forgive you in order for you to get rid of your guilt. You did your part. You asked forgiveness. If they choose not to forgive you, that's their problem. I always like to say unforgiveness is like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies. That unforgiveness is never going to touch the person who wronged you. They're going to go on with their life and they're going to be happy. But it's going to kill you. It's going to rot your bones. It's going to give you ulcers and cancer. And so you got to get rid of that unforgiveness.
Right.
So basically, after you forgive and make right, you're free. Then you do exactly what the person who has undeserved guilt does. You take that diaper that just pooped into it. The guilt is the poop. And you fold it up and you throw it away. So in either case, we're going to get rid of the guilt, because guilt is never good to hang around for a long time. Guilt is only there to say, hey, someone's knocking at the door. Yes. Did you do something wrong? Let's either fix it or ignore it. So that's how I deal with guilt. And yes, guilt can be a terrible, terrible thing, and we don't want it in our lives. And caregivers have a million things to feel guilty about. I'm not taking care of her good enough. Oh, she fell, and I should have been there. Well, gosh, you're there 24 hours a day. There isn't a 25th hour in the day for you to be there. You just have to realize that you can only do so much, and this is where faith comes in. I like to believe that I do everything in my power, and then the rest is up to God. He's got to do what's in his power. And if it happens, it happens. It was meant to be. If your mother was meant to die, then her time is up. Her number came up.
Yeah.
And you have no idea. So many people feel guilty because their loved one died, and they say, "Oh, if I could have just, well, my gosh, how many more years do you want them to suffer?" Because most people who are being cared for are in pain. They're not happy with the state they're in. They want to go on to heaven and be with God and get their new body. And caregivers just want to keep them around suffering.
Well, yeah, suffering, believe me, that is not where anybody wants to be. So I have a question about getting help, because I as you're talking, I'm listening, and then of course I'm having these flashbacks of when my mother passed away in 1985. So she was in this weird time. It was before heart transplants. It was hospices were just starting to become popular in Florida, and all of these different things. She was just a little bit too early to benefit from heart surgery. I think they were still doing pig heart experiments back in the mid 80s. But getting help, I remember feeling like there was no help to get. So I know you mentioned 21 years ago that you found a support group that helped you. So how can caregivers get help if they feel like there is no help to be had?
Well, there's two kinds of help that caregivers need. Number one is the self-help. They got to find a group. They got to surround themselves with positive people, and just put their needs first and not neglect their sleep and their diet and their exercise and their friends, and stop isolating themselves. The second kind of help is the practical kind. You got to get organized, get a big whiteboard and start managing the days and the weeks and the months, and start making phone calls. Say, "Hey, Aunt Mary, I could use you on Thursday from 2 to 3 to come over and do Charlene's nails. And, Cousin Tommy, can you stop at the store tomorrow and pick up some eggs, butter, and lettuce, and drop it on by, and daughter Debbie, can you, and so on." You delegate. You don't just say, "Hey, can anybody help me?" Facebook post, "I need help." Because no, that never works. Or the people who say, "Hey, if you ever needed help, call me."
It's really about asking for very specific help.
Very specific help. And make it, manageable. Not like, "Hey, can you come and watch Mom for the weekend?" Start with an hour or two, and then build up slowly. Let them know that it's not such a bad thing, that it can really be fun. Like, "Hey, why don't you bring over your photo album and show Mom, all those, 12, 15, 20 photo albums that we never have time to look at. But now, Mom with dementia would greatly benefit looking at photo albums that neither of you have seen in decades." That could be really fun, because all of a sudden she comes back to life, and all of a sudden she remembers who you are, and you're laughing about great memories and stuff. So, you just have to be creative. And like I said before, when you're in the negative woe is me mode and complaining about everything, you're not thinking about creative solutions to your problem. You're not thinking about calling so-and-so and telling them to bring their photo album, or calling Uncle Tom, who's got all the great 40s jazz music, and tell him to come over with his headphones and put them on Mom's head and let her reminisce all those songs and music that she grew up with and fell in love with, and so on and so on. You're more creative when you're surrounded by positive people, and you're not just woe is me complaining all the time. So those are the two kinds of help And basically, you just have to realize that it's a lot easier to ask for help. And I don't like asking for help. I hate asking for help just normally as a person, because I can do it myself. When I this year had a kidney stone, first time in my life, I didn't know what it was, and I felt like I was having a baby in my back.
Yeah,
I guess that's what's called back labor. I was in so much pain. I didn't want to bother anybody to call them up and ask them to drive me to the hospital. So I drove myself to the hospital like a fool. And I fortunately made it. And then, they gave me some morphine or something. And then they sent me home. They says, you just got to pass it. So the next day I got the pain back again. And this time I called an ambulance to pick me up because I didn't want to ask somebody, and we're just like that. And if I'm the caregiver's caregiver and even I can't even ask for help, how much more so, the regular old caregiver who doesn't know what I know. You know what I mean? It's just we're wired that way. We just don't want to inconvenience anyone. We'll call them and inconvenience them. If they called you, you would be right there helping them. It's time to return some favors.
I think you're right, because a lot of times, when I had my last son, I actually was in labor and I drove myself to the hospital, and I was like, I walk in. And I said, my labor pains are 5 minutes apart. And they said, oh, no, they couldn't be. And I said, yeah, I timed him on the way here. So I'm laughing, but it's serious at the same time.
Cut from the same cloth.
And then I also do recall that when I was about 12, the neighbor's wife, I think she had MS, and he used to hire me for about an hour a week. I'd go over and sit with his wife and read to her when he went somewhere. And so I guess that was his hour break that he took for that. And so, I was the neighbor.
Did you enjoy it?
I enjoyed it a lot. I enjoyed hanging out with her, talking to her, and I read to her, and we would talk about the story. And it was, it was an hour and a half. It was not like it was a long time.
I know, but think of it: you're robbing someone of a blessing when you don't ask for help.
Right. And it also opened my eyes that there were people who maybe needed companionship, and she was bedridden; she couldn't get out of bed, and I didn't really think about it until just now, about that was that hour and a half was for him probably a gift for him to just be able to get out of the house. So
it meant the world.
What kind of help is there? Like, does the government have any help for caregivers, or is there anything like that out there available through our government?
There are so many things available. You just need to get on Google and check the federal, the state, the county, the local governments. Veterans has a program that they will actually pay for assisted living if the person you're caring for was a veteran. The federal government through Medicare or Medicaid has so many programs. There's one right now called the Assisted Living Waiver Program in many states that will pay 100% of assisted living. And Medicaid usually does not pay for assisted living, but it's a 5-year pilot program, and it's in its third year of the second 5 years. They're currently out of money this year, but they're going to start again the first of the year. And you got to get in there. And if your loved one is ready to be moved to a facility, there's lots of nice assisted living facilities when things are getting just too hard to keep them at home again, or it's not safe for them to be at home. But I must warn you that 9 out of 10 assisted living facilities, I wouldn't want to put my cat in. So you really have to do your homework and experiment by going down there and, doing the smell tests and all of that stuff. Just check it out, because there are some very, very good ones. It's like looking for the needle in the haystack. And just Google other things. There's another program that will pay you to be a caregiver to your loved one in your home. So in addition to you getting their Social Security check as compensation, they will pay you up to 64 hours a week. And a lot of that pay can be used for respite care, where you bring in somebody, maybe from Visiting Angels or a caregiver agency to come in so that you can get rest and respite. There are just so many things out there. And I interviewed a woman. Go to my website, caregiverscaregiver.com, into the interview tabs, uplifting interviews. And there's a woman, Camille, I can't remember her last name, but just look it up. And she published this amazing book about 1.5 inches thick with everything in there that you need to know for free stuff, help with everything. I mean,
Wow.
this woman was amazing. She was just so anal about looking under every rock, every crack, every crevice to find free things, free money, free help, and I highly recommend that. So yeah, there's lots of help out there from our government.
Oh,
It's
great.
they don't advertise it because I don't know why, but it's out there.
Well, I think you just said it. A lot of times it requires you to, like you said, be anal and start looking and uncovering every rock and nook and cranny. So, and again, everyone, that's caregiverscaregiver.com. And I've been there, and oh my God, talk about a plethora of resources. You have a ton of things. So tell me, Dave, what type of support packages do you offer? I know you talked a little bit about them in the beginning, but you actually do quite a bit. You have the radio show, you've written 5 books, you have the website. What else do you have going on right now?
In addition to everything you mentioned, we have a blog. I do uplifting videos. I do a weekly conference call. We're in the process of monetizing our website to make it even better. For a one-time, very low fee, they're going to be getting a lot more stuff, a lot more of me, so that I can minister to them personally, through the calls and what have you, a private website page on Facebook, etc. And it's going to be great, and for a little extra, we're going to be offering personal coaching, because sometimes, people just need a little extra stuff than the pat stuff that's in the book. They need some special attention. And so we're just going to be their care. We're going to be their accountability. We're going to be their support. And so it's going to be a great site. It's being transitioned as we speak right now, but it's still there. Obviously, you can go on and everything that's there is more than enough of what anyone would need to get help.
Great. So let me know, how can we reach you? All I can tell you is that everything you provide is of such great value. And like you said it, everybody is either going to be a caregiver, they have been a caregiver, or they're going to need care given at some point in time. So how can we get more information?
Well, it's a one-stop shopping. All you do is go to the website, caregiverscaregiver.com, and that'll direct you to our Facebook page, our Twitter page, our LinkedIn, our Instagram, just everything you need to know, everywhere you need to go, our YouTube page, it's all there. We've got almost 200 interviews that we've done. A lot of them are video on YouTube, so you don't have to just stare at the ceiling. You can actually watch us talking to you. So very informational. Just take one a day, and if you do that, if you listen to one interview a day, I guarantee you, in a year, you'll be a different person.
Yeah, and you'll be an expert, just like Dave, the caregiver's caregiver, is. And everyone, on the show notes, you'll be able to just click right through to the website, the LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Google Plus, everything. So Dave, thank you so much. I've learned so much about caregiving. I really appreciate all your time. And be sure to say hello to Charlene for us. And
I will.
Tell her
Thank
how
you
much
so
you
much.
Enjoyed it. So thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you. one last note for all those people. I can almost hear it in the background saying, I don't have time to do that. I don't have a minute a day. Well, you know what? I guess this isn't for you then. It's only for people who really want to get better. If you want to just keep doing what you're doing, just keep doing what you're doing, and you'll keep feeling what you're feeling. And so that's the bottom line. And thank you so much for having me on.
This is Tammy Patzer. Go make it a beautiful day.
You've been listening to the Thought Leaders Show. To get all past shows and to get all future shows, go to thoughtleadersshow.com.